I heard it breathe outside my window last night. Not the wind, not an animal. Something that paused between inhales like it was listening to me, listening to it. I moved to this cabin 6 months ago. Remote work, burnt out, the usual story. Found the place on a forestry lease. 40 acres, no neighbors for 8 miles. The kind of isolation that's supposed to heal you. The listing photos showed moss-covered logs and morning fog rolling through pine trees. It looked like peace. The real estate agent mentioned the previous tenant left suddenly. Didn't take most of his things. I should have asked more questions. First week was perfect. I'd sleep with the windows open, fall asleep to crickets and owls. Then I started noticing the pattern. Every night around 2 a.m., the forest would go silent, not gradually. Like someone flipped a switch. 1 second, the usual chorus of night sounds. The next, absolutely nothing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin in the same direction every time. Clockwise, always clockwise. I told myself it was a bear, maybe an elk. But bears don't stop at every window. They don't stand there waiting. Last night, I made the mistake of looking. The curtain was thin enough. I could see a shape pressed against the glass, tall and wrong, and I swear to God it saw me see it. That's when the scratching started. Normal world setup. I'd been in the cabin for 3 weeks before I realized I hadn't spoken out loud in days. The silence crept up on me. No coworkers to make small talk with, no barista asking how my morning was. Just me, my laptop, and the endless scroll of emails that somehow felt less urgent out here. My company didn't care where I worked as long as the reports got filed. The cabin had satellite internet, slow but functional. Good enough for spreadsheets and video calls I kept my camera off for. The place itself was smaller than the photo suggested. One main room with a wood stove, a loft bedroom accessible by a ladder that creaked like it had opinions, a bathroom with pipes that hammered when the water ran. The logs were dark with age, gaps chinked with crumbling mortar that let in threads of cold air. It smelled like cedar and mouse droppings and 50 years of wood smoke baked into the walls. I kept a routine. Coffee at dawn, work until noon, then I'd hike the property lines or split firewood until my shoulders ached. The physical labor felt good, honest. I'd make dinner as the sun dropped behind the ridge, usually something simple, pasta or canned soup heated on the propane stove. Then I'd read by lamplight until my eyes got heavy. The forest was loud at first. I wasn't used to it. The constant backdrop of wind through pine needles, branches rubbing together, the occasional crack of a falling tree somewhere distant. Birds I couldn't name called to each other at dusk. At night, the coyotes would start up, their yipping chorus echoing across the valley. I felt myself unwinding, sleeping better, the knot between my shoulder blades finally loosening. But there was this tree, about 30 yards from the back window, a massive Douglas fir with a split trunk. The bark on one side had been stripped away in long vertical gouges, pale wood exposed underneath. Too high for deer, too systematic. I noticed it my second day and kept meaning to look closer. I never did. Something about walking toward it made my stride falter, made me choose a different direction for my afternoon hike. I told myself it was just a rubbing tree or lightning damage, but I never quite believed it. The first week, I started noticing patterns. 1. The cabin was always colder in the morning than it should have been. I'd bank the fire before bed, leave it smoldering with enough coals to keep the chill off. But every dawn I'd wake to my breath misting in the air, the stove stone cold. Like something had drawn all the heat out during the night. 2. My boots. I kept them by the door, laces tucked inside so they wouldn't trail. But 3 mornings in a row, I found them facing the wrong direction. Toes pointed toward the door instead of away from it. The kind of detail you notice but don't quite trust. And I turned them myself. Was I sleepwalking? I started checking before bed, aligning them just so. They were always reversed by morning. 3. The birds stopped singing at exactly the same time each night. Not gradually, the way they do at dusk all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. I timed it one evening, 9:47 p.m. The forest went from alive to utterly silent in the space of a heartbeat. Then, an hour later, they'd start up again. Same abruptness, same unnatural timing. And 4, the tree, that Douglas fir with the stripped bark. I finally looked at it through binoculars from the back window. The gouges weren't random, they were evenly spaced, parallel, like something with 4 or 5 fingers had gripped the trunk and dragged downward. Again and again, the fresh wood underneath had a waxy sheen to it, and there were hairs caught in the bark. Long, dark, coarse hairs that definitely weren't from any deer. I lowered the binoculars and made myself laugh. Some bear had claimed it as a scratching post. That's all. The boots were me, half asleep and shuffling around. The fire, well, I probably wasn't banking it as well as I thought. The birds, migration patterns, temperature changes, who knew? I was looking for problems because isolation makes you weird. Makes you see things that aren't there. I went back to my book and poured another coffee. It was probably nothing. That night I woke to the sound of something breathing. Not inside, outside, just beyond the window beside my bed. I lay there in the dark, heart drumming against my ribs, trying to convince myself I was still half asleep, that I was hearing the wind through the pines, or my own breath echoing strangely in the small room. But the rhythm was wrong. Too slow. Too deliberate. In, out, like something savoring the air. I didn't move. Didn't even turn my head toward the window. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped. I waited in the silence, counting my own heartbeats, until I finally worked up the nerve to look. Nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees against the starless sky. I checked my phone. 9:47 p.m., the exact moment the birds always stopped. I got up, moved to the living room, tried to shake it off, poured a glass of water with hands that trembled just slightly. I was being ridiculous. It was wind or an animal, or my own paranoid brain misfiring after too many weeks alone. I'd read somewhere that isolation does strange things to perception, makes you hyper-aware of every small sound. But when I walked past the front door, I stopped. The boots, they were facing outward again. I stood there staring at them, water glass cold in my hand. I checked them before bed, turned them inward, toes touching the wall the way I always did now. I remembered doing it, remembered the small sense of control it gave me. There was no way I'd turned them around in the 15 minutes since I'd gone to bed. No way. I set the glass down on the table, walked over to the boots, turned them back around, very carefully, very deliberately. Then I grabbed my phone and took a picture of them. Proof. Documentation. Something to check in the morning when I doubted myself. I went back to bed but didn't sleep. Just lay there listening to the nothing outside my window until the birds suddenly started up again at 10:47, as if someone had flipped that switch back. In the morning, I checked the photo. The boots in the image were facing inward, just as I'd left them. I looked at the actual boots by the door, inward, toes to the wall. I must have gotten up in the night after all. Turned them again without remembering. The photo must have been taken after that second adjustment, not before. I'd been confused, half asleep, and my sense of sequence had gotten jumbled. That was the explanation I settled on. The only explanation that made sense. Until I found the second note. It was tucked under the woodpile right where I'd been reaching for kindling. A scrap of paper, edges soft with age and moisture. The handwriting was different from mine. Shaky, rushed. Don't answer if someone calls your name from outside. I read it 3 times. Turned it over. Nothing else. Just that single line. My chest went tight. I'd never called out to anything. Never responded to sounds outside. But I'd never been warned not to either. This wasn't something I'd written. This was from before. From whoever had been here before me. I went back through the cabin looking now. Really looking. Found the third note wedged between the logs near the window. Almost invisible unless you knew where to search. If you hear footsteps on the roof, stay in bed until morning. Fourth note, folded into a crack in the floorboard by the stove. Never look directly at the tree line after dark. 5 notes total. 5 rules I'd been following without knowing they were rules at all. Someone had lived here before me. Someone who'd learned these things the hard way, written them down, hidden them like breadcrumbs or warnings. And then they'd left. Or hadn't. I sat at the table with all 5 notes spread out in front of me, trying to remember if the rental agency had mentioned anything about a previous tenant. They hadn't. Just said the cabin had been in the family for years, rarely used. Rarely used. Not empty. The sun was already setting. I'd lost track of time. I checked the boots. Inward. I checked the window locks. Secure. I checked the stove damper, even though I hadn't used it in days. Then I sat in the chair facing the door and waited. The footsteps started at 2:13 a.m. Not outside this time. On the roof. Slow. Deliberate. Heel toe, pacing the length of the cabin, right above my head. I sat frozen in the chair. Note number 3 crumpled in my fist. If you hear footsteps on the roof, stay in bed until morning. But I wasn't in bed. Did that matter? Was the bed specifically significant? Or was it just about staying inside, staying still, not reacting? The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a sound at the door. Not knocking. Scratching. Fingernails on wood, slow and methodical, like someone testing the surface. Feeling for a way in. The handle turned. I watched it rotate, clockwise, smooth and certain. The door didn't open. I'd locked it, deadbolt and chain both, but the handle turned all the way and stopped. Held there, waiting. My phone was on the table. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a signal, but I grabbed it anyway, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. No bars. Of course. The handle released, turned back to center position. Then I heard breathing. Not from outside, from beneath the floorboards. Deep, rhythmic, the kind of breathing you feel in your chest before you hear it. The cabin is raised on a stone foundation. There's a crawl space underneath, maybe 2 feet high. I'd never even thought about what might fit in there. The breathing moved. Traveled from beneath the door toward the center of the room, toward where I sat. I stood without thinking, back toward the bedroom. My heel caught the edge of the rug and I stumbled, caught myself on the doorframe. The noise was small, but in the silence it was everything. The breathing stopped. The quiet that followed was worse than any sound. It had weight to it, presence, like the air itself was holding still, watching me. Something scraped under the floor, wood on stone. Something dragging itself through that narrow space, repositioning. And I realized with a clarity that made my stomach drop it had been under here the whole time. Every night I'd been here. Below me, waiting. The scratching came again, directly under my feet now. I couldn't move. Every muscle locked. This was the moment I understood that the rules hadn't been protection. They'd been a test, a way to measure whether I was worth the effort, and I just failed one. A board creaked near the stove, not from weight above, from pressure below. Something pushing up, testing. The old wood flexed, groaned. Splinters of light from my lantern disappeared into the widening gap. I remembered the note, "Stay in bed until morning." The bed was 5 feet away. I looked at it. Unmade sheets tangled from where I'd given up trying to sleep days ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like looking at a life raft from across an ocean. The board by the stove lifted an inch, then settled. I moved. 3 steps. Fast. I threw myself onto the mattress hard enough that the frame hit the wall, buried my face in the pillow, pulled the blanket over my head like a child. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would tear through my ribs. The cabin went silent again. Then footsteps. Inside this time. Walking across the main room. Not heavy. Not quite right. The rhythm was off, the spacing wrong. Like something that had learned to walk by watching but never quite got it perfect. They stopped at the bedroom threshold. I could hear it there. Breathing again. Closer now. The smell hit me through the blanket. Earth and decay and something else. Something animal and ancient, and so fundamentally wrong that my hindbrain screamed to run. But I didn't. I stayed in bed. Exactly like the note said. The breathing came closer, right beside the bed. I could feel the displacement of air as it moved. Could sense the shape of it even through closed eyes and fabric tall. Too tall. Joints that bent in ways that made my mind refuse to construct an image. Something touched the blanket near my shoulder. Not a hand. Too cold. Too many points of contact. It rested there, weight without warmth, and I bit down on the pillow to keep from screaming. The sun woke me. That was the first strange thing. I'd slept. Actually slept. The thing had been there. I remembered the weight on the blanket, the wrongness of its presence, and then nothing. Dreamless black. The kind of sleep I hadn't had since before I moved here. I sat up slowly. The bedroom door was still closed. Morning light came through the gap beneath it in a clean yellow line. The cabin was quiet. I got out of bed and walked to the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. When I opened it, the main room looked exactly as I'd left it. Coffee mug on the counter. Wood stove cold. The board near the stove flush with the floor undisturbed. Nothing was broken. Nothing was moved. I checked the door. Still locked from the inside, deadbolt engaged. The windows were intact, latched tight. No tracks on the floor. No smell. Just the ordinary staleness of a cabin that had been sealed up overnight. For a moment, I felt relief so intense it made me dizzy. Had I imagined it? Some kind of waking nightmare brought on by isolation and fear. Then I saw the notebook. It was on the table where I'd left it, but it was open now. Open to a new page. The handwriting was the same. That careful, precise script. Fresh ink. A new entry dated today. You're doing well. Most don't make it past the first week. A few reminders. Stay in bed when it comes. Don't look directly at it. Never try to leave during the night. The rules exist for your protection. You'll understand eventually. We all do. My hands went numb. I flipped back through the notebook with shaking fingers, looking at all those dated entries. Instructions, warnings, observations, months and months of them. The handwriting was identical throughout. All of it, the same as the lease agreement I'd signed. The same as the note the landlord left. The same as every piece of paper I'd been given about this place. I looked at my right hand. At the pen I didn't remember picking up. At the ink stain on my index finger that hadn't been there yesterday.